This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guests, as we continue our remembrance of Michael Ratner, are his both dear friends, his colleagues, and his co-authors, Michael Smith and Reed Brody. Michael Smith co-authored the book Who Killed Che? How the CIA Got Away with Murder. He is an attorney and board member of the Center for Constitutional Rights, which Michael Ratner was president of for so many years. Also with us, Reed Brody, who is with Human Rights Watch, an attorney there, who wrote the Pinochet Papers with Michael Ratner as well. Michael Ratner died this week, died on Wednesday of complications related to cancer. He was 72 years old. Michael Smith, I wanted to go back in time, and Juan, this involves you as well. Going back to the 1960s, describe the young Michael Ratner. What shaped him? And ultimately, both Juan and Michael's involvement in the Columbia student strike.
You know, Michael came from a Polish-Jewish family, grew up in Cleveland. His father was a wonderful, charitable man. And in the Jewish tradition, the highest form of charity is anonymous charity. And Harry Ratner was known for helping people and not letting anybody know what he was doing. And I think Michael inherited that kind of humane instinct. Michael and Michael's brother Bruce and sister Ellen, they're all like that. By the time he got to college, you know, things were cooking. And he was at Brandeis. Herbert Marcuse, the radical scholar, was there. Angela Davis was a student with Michael. The civil rights movement was the initial thing that affected Michael, the struggle for black rights, and then the war in Vietnam. And Michael quickly came to understand that the right side of the war in Vietnam was to support the Vietnamese and oppose this government. And well, you know, Juan, because you were part of that too. So it was the black struggle and the solidarity with Vietnam that were the initial impulses with Michael. And then, of course, when he got out of law school, he could have gone to work anywhere. Michael, he'll never tell you this because he was too self-effacing, but Michael finished first in his class at an Ivy League law school. He could have had a job anywhere. He could have worked for some fancy white shoe firm. He could have worked for the government. He could have done anything. And what did he do? He went and hung up a shingle with Margaret Ratner Kunstler, and they did criminal defense law and movement law for the first 2 years. Then he clerked for Constance Baker Motley, the first woman black judge in the country, and then he went on and got a job with the Center for Constitutional Rights. His first assignment, the first week that he took the job, was they sent him up to Attica. And, you know, there had been this huge prison rebellion. Rockefeller wanted to be president, so he didn't want any kind of to be seen soft on these prisoners. So he ordered the execution of 43 prisoners were murdered. And Michael went up there to take statements from the survivors to try to figure out what the center would do in that situation. And he stayed with the center from '71 until he was president emeritus of the CCR yesterday when he passed away. So he was with the center for over 40 some years, and really was that second generation at the center. The center was founded by Bill Kunstler, Arthur Conoy, and Morty Stavis. They volunteered. There was no budget. I mean, you know, it was just the three of them. And now it's a major human rights organization. And Michael saw that transition and trained those people in the second generation. It's now under the leadership of Catherine Franke and Vince Warren and Bahar Azmi, and it's as radical as ever. It's just bigger and stronger and well-known and popular. And it was Michael's legacy to us that he oversaw and shaped that.
The Columbia student strike.
Yeah, well, Michael was a law student during the strike. There were many radical law students. Gus Reichbach, another wonderful activist lawyer who passed away a few years ago, was eventually became a judge, was one of his closest friends there at the law school, and they became increasingly radicalized during the strike, as I was, and against the Vietnam War and against university racism. In fact, I think I may have been one of Michael's earliest clients. I think he was still in law school in 1969 when I was arrested for the only time I was arrested for a non-protest event. It was a marijuana bust. Several students.
I mean, maybe there was a protest of sorts.
Four of us were arrested by the police one evening from a party, and we said, well, what do we do now? And one of the students said, oh, Michael, let's talk to Michael. Maybe he can help us out. And somehow, I don't know how it worked, Michael got us all got the case dismissed for illegal search and seizure. So I've known him since then, since 1969, and he's always been a person representing and fighting for the underdog.
Can you talk about Constance Baker Motley? He actually clerked for her. Is that right, Michael Smith?
Yeah, she really admired him and was grateful for his good work.
She was the first African-American woman judge.
And because he was so studious and well-trained and hard-working, the kind of memos that he produced for her, in her own words, were never met. For any clerk she had after that, Michael stood out as the most intelligent and productive.
First in his class at Columbia Law School.
Yeah, well, that's now public knowledge, but I don't think people
I didn't even know.
Nobody knew that. He would never tell you that, ever. But he was amazing. He was very disciplined. Michael worked all the time. Even after he got out of the hospital after his surgery for brain cancer, he had an uncompleted autobiography to work on, and it wasn't easy for him. He had radiation to his brain. He had a surgery. He had this really debilitating medicine that he had to take. But he dragged himself into his office, and he worked every day for an hour to complete that autobiography, and he almost completed it.
Reed? I taught with Michael for 5 years at Columbia Law School. I actually didn't know until yesterday when Bruce told me that he was #1 in his class, because we taught a class for 5 years basically in how to get the bad guys. Michael was the expert on how to get the bad guys in the U.S., and I was theoretically the expert on how to get the bad guys outside of the U.S. And what people loved about the class was not the academic background that we brought to it, but people loved watching Michael Ratner talk about how he did it, and so many people saw Michael as a role model. Michael was my role model. He was my mentor. He was my hero. I think everything I did my entire life, I always thought, what would Michael think about this? I mean, we had different choices. We had different views on certain things, but it was always in my mind. And so many people looked at Michael, his students, his children, so many people's children looked at Michael as a role model, because he was, as people said on this show, he was not only a model lawyer, but he was a model human being. He was generous. He was modest. He put the clients first. He put the causes first. He was modest about what the law and what his role was. But he lived the life, I think, that he wanted people to live. And people gravitated towards him because of his generosity.
I just saw a note from Harold Coe, who is the Sterling Professor of International Law at Yale Law School. They taught together at Yale, but when Harold Coe moved into the State Department, they had vast disagreements. I mean, vast. And Reed, maybe you can explain what those disagreements were, because Harold Coe just wrote that Michael was one of the greatest people I ever knew. I owe him so much.
Michael, and let me say that Harold Coe is the most intelligent person I know. I mean, Harold Coe was a professor, was the dean of Yale Law School, worked with Michael particularly on getting the HIV-positive Haitians out of Guantanamo. Harold went into the State Department and you know, and provided the rationale for the use of drones in particular, really caused. I mean, it was sad to see because I look up to Harold. I still look up to Harold, but this was a very serious issue for many of us. The use of the targeted killings by the U.S. administration. But, you know, you can't, no matter what side of the issue you are on, you cannot look at Michael Ratner other than as a principled advocate and as a great human being.
Speaking of Harold Coe, I wanted to go to a clip because he's within this, and this is still part of the birthday tribute to Michael on his 60th birthday. And he's talking about his work in Haiti.
The first Bush administration was sending back to Haiti refugees fleeing from terrible conditions there.
The Coast Guard had orders to rescue the Haitians. Those with credible stories of political persecution were taken to a U.S. military base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
It was not just another refugee camp. There were Haitians who were tested HIV or positive.
There were orphaned kids and kids who were sick and kids with parents who were sick, and we were trying to get them into this country.
Paul Son and Kurt Peterson dragged me out of Naples one night and said, we got to go find this guy Michael Ratner and Harold Coe. They've got this amazing case. They need help.
One of the first things that the Bush administration did was they came back and they filed a motion against us for something called Rule 11, which is to subject us, the lawyers personally, for financial penalties for filing a frivolous lawsuit.
As long as the laws are on the book, I will not, because I've sworn to uphold the Constitution, open the doors to economic refugees all over the world.
And when I received the motion, I was shattered. And I called Michael, and Michael said, Harold, every case I've ever filed, I've been Rule 11.
This sort of ragtag group, people sort of sleeping day and night in, you know, conference rooms, you know, putting together crazy lawsuits to wake up judges in the middle of the night to file.
Michael, you know, really went toe-to-toe with all of the students that were half his age. And, you know, he had a family, he had other cases, and yet he worked the same amount of hours as all of us.
He was utterly consumed by the case and devastated by what was being done to the refugees on Guantanamo.
Michael had, you know, brought me up to speed on what was happening there, and we'd had a press conference. I was reading letters that he provided from, you know, a woman that was locked up and on the hunger fast, and we went on the Academy Awards.
The students and I, because it was our first big case, we really took everything personally. And when we go into the courtroom with the other lawyers from the other side, we wouldn't talk to them. We'd stare and glare at them. We hated them.
Michael developed a relationship with Paul Cappuccio, who was a very senior Department of Justice official. The senior lawyer is a special assistant to the Attorney General, and an extraordinarily conservative young gun in the Bush 1 administration.
Michael was going over it, cracking jokes and laughing and slapping him on the back. You know, we couldn't believe it. You know, this is dancing with the devil. But Michael would come back and he'd have more information about what was going on.
Day after day in the fall of '92, the phone would ring from the highest reaches of the Department of Justice, and the most conservative lawyer would get on the phone and strike up this bantering relationship with Michael, where they would joke and josh, and at the end of the conversation, Michael had somehow persuaded him to let 3 more people free from Guantanamo.
We watched this big airplane, military aircraft, land. And the doors opened, and instead of soldiers walking in, you know, refugees came streaming out, and they were crying and happy, and they came running over to us.
The human compassion that he brings, the ability to find a common bond with Paul Cappuccio in the midst of all the battles that delivers, you know, freedom for his clients. And that, to me, sets him apart, even from some of the most accomplished civil rights lawyers. It's not just intellectual for Michael, it's very personal.
That clip from a tribute film to Michael, and I wanted to go to one more. In April of 1994, in the midst of the Haitian refugee crisis, Michael Ratner and the Center for Constitutional Rights visited what were supposed to be temporary camps in the Bahamas to house asylum seekers.
I want to tell you something what's happening here. It's going into a permanent refugee camp. These are no longer, well, like a lot of things going on. There's piping everywhere. They're putting in real bathrooms. They don't use the outhouses anymore. There's real bathrooms, real showers, real medical clinic, real kitchen. and piping going underground. They don't do that for temporary refugee camps. It means they're going to be processing people through this camp, back to Haiti mostly, and then as they get more and more refugees, just putting them into this camp and continuing the processing. That's at least one guess. I don't know, but I've never seen, in Guantanamo, in a year and a half, they were using outhouses for a year and a half. So the fact that in 3 weeks in the Bahamas they're putting in running water means that there's something completely fishy. People don't do that. People don't do that out of the goodness of their heart for refugees. So there's something going on.
That was Michael Ratner in 1994, a recording from Crowing Rooster Productions. Just 2 weeks after this visit, the Haitian political refugees in that clip were forcibly repatriated to Haiti and their oppressors by the Bahamian government with the complicity of the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. We're talking about the life and legacy of Michael Ratner, who died at the age of 72 of cancer, complications related to cancer. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez, and our guests are his close colleagues, co-authors, and friends, Michael Smith and Reed Brody.
Reed, I wanted to ask you about one of the, I guess, Michael's most famous recent cases, his attempt to bring Donald Rumsfeld, the former Secretary of Defense, to justice for his war crimes.
Sure. Well, as the Center, Human Rights Watch, and many others have said, U.S. officials under the Bush administration have a case to answer for torture, for the waterboarding, for the use of secret prisons, for rendition to torture. Michael wrote a book called Donald Rumsfeld, Trial by Book, but he also, together with the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, of which he was the founder, helped to file lawsuits abroad using the Pinochet principle, the principle of universal jurisdiction. And Michael and Wolfgang Kalleck from the ECCHR and others filed a case in Germany. They filed a case in France. And not just against Donald Rumsfeld. There was a case filed also against George Bush. Unfortunately, political realities being what they are, in country after country, these cases were dismissed on patently political grounds. There are some cases actually that are still alive. I was called to, I was cited as a witness for a case in Spain that was, of course, being brought before Judge Garzón, and Judge Garzón is not there anymore. But Michael believed in the rule of law.
I wanted to go to Michael talking about this. When he went to Germany in 2006 to file those cases against the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, I asked him about the case when he was in Germany.
One of the shocking things really so far about the coverage of Rumsfeld's resignation, there's not a word in any of it about torture. And here Rumsfeld is one of the architects of the torture program of the United States. I mean, we have those sheets of paper that went to Guantanamo that talk about using dogs and stripping people and hooding people. We have one of our clients, El Qahtani, who was in Guantanamo. Rumsfeld essentially supervised that entire interrogation, one of the worst interrogations that happened at Guantanamo. He actually authorized a rendition, a fake rendition of El Qahtani, where they put him, blindfolded him, sedated him, put him on an airplane and flew him back to Guantanamo, so he thought he would be in some torture country. So here you have Rumsfeld, one of the architects, not a word about it.
How do you know that he personally supervised?
There's actually documents out there. There's part of the log that comes out. The log was published of his interrogation, and then there's a report called the Schmidt Report, which was an internal investigation in which there are statements in there about Rumsfeld being directly involved in the interrogation of El Qahtani. So this guy has committed, without any question, this guy has committed war crimes, violations of the Geneva Conventions. Now, what do we do now? Well, we went to Germany before. Germany dismissed the earlier case on Rumsfeld, partly for political reasons, obviously. Rumsfeld said, I'm not going back to Germany as long as this case is pending in Germany. He had to go to the Munich Security Conference. They dismissed the case 2 days before. What they said when they dismissed it, what they said was, we think the United States is still looking into going up the chain of command, essentially, and looking into what the conduct of our officials are. In fact, now, 2 years later, look where we are. One, he's resigned. So any kind of immunity he might have as a vice president from prosecution is out the window. Secondly, of course, as a little gift package to these guys, our Congress with the president has now given immunity to U.S. officials for war crimes. they basically said you can't be prosecuted for war crimes. That's in the Military Commission Act. Now that immunity, like the immunities in Argentina and Chile during the dirty wars, does not apply overseas. So now you have Germany sitting there with there's no longer an argument the U.S. can possibly prosecute him because within the U.S. he's out. So you have Germany sitting there with a former vice president, with a former Secretary of Defense, and basically an immunity situation in the United States. So the chances in Germany have been raised tremendously, I think, and the stakes for Rumsfeld, not only in Germany but anywhere that guy travels, he is going to be like the Henry Kissinger of the next period.
So that was Michael Ratner in 2006, who headed the Center for Constitutional Rights for so many years. And I wanted to end this part of our conversation by asking where Michael felt he could go with these cases. Did Donald Rumsfeld, is he afraid of traveling to other places? Is he afraid of being picked up? Did he believe that he could always win, Michael Ratner, when he brought these cases, Reed?
No, I think Michael brought cases because they were right. And you know, when Pinochet, I've been so used to working with Michael on suits to stop the war and things that never succeeded, that when we actually won the case against Pinochet, it was this effervescence. I mean, you know, you're used to being right and losing, and there we won. But in fact, the world has become a smaller place. For U.S. Tortures, George Bush canceled a trip to Switzerland after a lawsuit was filed against him there. I think that, you know, I mean, even Henry Kissinger does not travel to many countries. And I think we are seeing that Europe, in particular European countries that care about the rule of law, don't want to be faced with the choice of either violating their obligations or arresting people like Kissinger or Donald Rumsfeld.
Michael Smith, and your last thoughts?
Yeah, well, you know, ultimately, Michael believed in the movement, and I have a quote for you. "The battle for a just society will not be won in the courtroom, and all of us have an obligation to resist illegitimate authority."
And this final quote from David Cole on the Guantanamo case, which is like a number of these cases. David said, when I asked him, talking about Michael, when I asked him several years later what he thought his chances were in filing that suit, he answered, none whatsoever. We filed 100% on principle. That could be his epitaph, said David. Thanks so much. It's hard to think of Michael gone. Yes, he lost his battle with cancer, but his struggle for justice is the legacy he leaves that will be carried on by so many he inspired.
Well, thank you, Amy. I just wanted to say there's no joy the world can give like what it takes away.
Michael Smith and Reed Brody. We'll go out there on July 4th and play ball. And Juan, this is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.